Hi, everybody. We're going to get started. First of all, thank you for joining us. And if you have tomorrow and Monday off, happy Virtual Friday. Happy Thursday for the rest of us. Today's topic is going to be hiring hacks, how Dolby recruits engineers. Speaking right now, this is Vivian Rackover. I'm a senior account executive at Codility, and I've actually been with the company for about 4 years. So I've seen a lot within this market over the last 4 years, really a lot of the way that it's evolved. And very much so, being about 2, 3, 4 years ago, a place of a lot of companies that were doing tech hiring saying, do we want to use some sort of technical assessment platform? And really changing over the last year or two into more of what kind of technical assessments do we want to provide to our candidates, and which technical assessment platform are we going to use? For the agenda today, so we'll start off, I've already given you a quick introduction of myself and my background within the market and with Codility. And then I'm going to introduce Steve Byrne. He's going to give you a little bit of his background. He's been with Dolby for about 9 years now as a recruiting manager. So he'll talk about his background. And then for about 30, 40 minutes, he's going to talk about how Dolby hires engineers. Now, at the end, we're going to have about 10 to 20 minutes for Q&A. So as you guys do have questions that come up as Steve is speaking, please feel free to enter them into the chat. There's an area for your questions. And I'll give you guys another reminder once we get to the Q&A portion as well. And I'll be able to read those out to Steve. He'll primarily be answering them, and I'll jump in with any additional information that I've seen with some of our other companies within the space as well. So Steve, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. So hi, my name's Steve Byrne. I'm the recruiting manager for Dolby Labs based in Sydney, Australia. So the Sydney arm of Dolby is a pure engineering and research and development center for Dolby. I joined in 2011, so it's almost my 9-year anniversary working at Dolby. When I joined, the numbers were in the 60s in terms of staff, and we've grown to around 150 people. So, you know, fairly significant growth in that period of time. And in fact, I was the first technical recruiter based in Australia. So we moved from a model where it was HR plus some external recruitment agencies working on recruitment to having a fully in-house recruitment model. A little bit of background about myself. I'm Irish, as you may hear from my accent. I started off my career, I did an arts degree and decided to really put that into good effect by starting off my career in finance. So I worked for Accenture for a couple of years, then moved to Australia and kind of fell into recruiting initially and looking for a job that would get me to stay in Australia, looking for jobs in finance, and actually ended up taking my first role in finance recruitment in 2004, and really fell in love with recruiting as an activity. And from finance recruitment, I moved into technical recruitment about 18 months later, and I've been there ever since, and I really felt like I've found my home in terms of technical recruitment. And started off an agency and did that for a number of years, but I've been working internal for about the last 10 years and certainly very much enjoyed that transition. So I wanted to give a little bit of a background in Dolby. Hopefully most of the people who are listening today are familiar with us as a company. We've been around a long time, started in 1965 by Ray Dolby, a visionary scientist, inventor and engineer, and have grown to now over 2,200 employees across 21 countries. Known best for audio. We started off working in music production, noise reduction technology there, moved into the cinema side of things, and in fact, every movie that's won an Academy Award since 1977 in the sound categories has featured Dolby technology. So that's probably what we're best known for. Brought that technology into the home in consumer devices, and have now moved into some other areas, mobile and cloud technology as well. So very broad, and moved beyond audio into video and imaging technology, and also communications technology. So we're an interesting company, and possibly slightly hard to boil down on what we do, but we're ultimately about experiential experiences. You know, we advance the science of sight and sound to create and enable spectacular experiences across entertainment and now communications as well. And we've been very much a market leader in innovation in that space since the 60s. In terms of our environment, culture-wise, where we work very collaboratively. We work very much in an agile way. We very much embraced agile and Scrum methodology for all of our engineering teams. So we do sprints and daily stand-ups and stories, and you know, have moved very much from, you know, more traditional methodologies like waterfall very much into agile, and that's been very well received by our engineers. We've certainly looked to stay at the very cutting edge of technology and how, as people have changed, how they are accessing entertainment and you know, moving from physical devices into you know, streaming technology and into the cloud. That's certainly something that we've needed to make sure we're at the forefront of. So we're very much working in the cloud space, working with AI and machine learning and looking at IoT and how that applies to our domain area as well. In terms of the type of people who enjoy working at Dolby, I think you will find that we're very much a passionate bunch. You know, I think the domain areas that we work in, audio and video, if you can combine your personal interests with your day job, that's really nice. So you find at Dolby a lot of people who are audiophiles and, you know, musicians and sound engineers and filmmakers. So it's quite a creative place. It's quite a place that it fosters innovation. You know, there's really that sense of trying to push the boundaries of what we can do. So I think people come to Dolby and come here for a career rather than just a job. In terms of the type of technologies and what we look for, obviously audio and video is a big part of what we do. So looking at audio and video signal processing and image processing, working with a really broad range of technologies from fairly low level programming languages like C to higher level languages like C++, scripting tools like Python, and then obviously mobile apps development, so iOS and Android, and then obviously cloud technologies is really a big part of where we're growing in the future. But beyond the actual programming languages, I think the types of people we look for, there's a really strong focus on being able to code across multiple languages, and depending on the different technology area that you work in. We like our engineers to have a strong grounding in software engineering principles, and have a, you know, particularly in certain areas, we'd look for signal processing is a big focus of what we do, and that's a particularly niche skill set, I guess, as well. So that's something that's a big focus for a number of different teams within Dolby. I think we like people who have got strong problem solving capabilities, so people who can think around a problem. I think the engineers here are frequently faced with fuzzy problems where there's no clear solution. So being able to think creatively and think around a problem is very important to us in general. And also people who can take a step back and think holistically and see the big picture and think systemically and be able to understand that where they're working on the effects that it'll have upstream and downstream. I think that's really important as well, and it's one of the reasons why Dolby technology plugs in so well and works across a whole variety of domains and in different areas as well. So how do we hire? That's an interesting question. We've got pretty robust recruiting methodologies, and we need to really robustly test our candidates to make sure that we're getting the quality of engineer that we look for. We try and streamline the process, I think, as much as possible. We're not the type of company that will have 8 or 9 interview stages as well. We generally try to keep it to 3 stages as much as we can. So a phone interview, a coding exercise, and then a final in-depth interview where we'll really dig into people's skill set and also assess for fit, I guess, as well. Some of the challenges I think we've had and looked to overcome is we've really dug into the idea of looking at unconscious bias. We know as humans, we're making decisions all the time, and both consciously and subconsciously, I guess. So making sure that we are adding as much objectivity into the recruiting process as we can, and making sure that we're not introducing things like confirmation bias or similarity bias into the process, I guess, as well. And we spent a long time working with our hiring teams to train them to bring awareness to this as an issue and to really help minimize it. And of course, one of the other things you can do there is have an objective tool like Codility to actually help with that as well and add some more objectivity into the process. What we don't want to have is inaccurate signals going back to the hiring team based upon the fact that we haven't actually assessed the candidates in the right way, I guess, as well. One of the things we've looked to do is really to optimize how we use the engineer's time in the hiring process. There's frequently a large pool of applicants, between people who will apply to the positions on our applicant tracking system and also, the recruiting activities and our sourcing strategy as well. So we need to be very streamlined in terms of how we engage with engineering teams to help assess those candidates as well. So having tools that will help automate some of this and streamline some of it and save time is very important, I guess, as well. And I think we are in a global community. We are starting to do a lot more of remote hiring and being able to assess remotely. Obviously, COVID is certainly something that has really accelerated that for businesses as well. But I think even for a company like Dolby anyway, we've had to hire globally. So having access to live coding exercises and that ability to be able to assess people remotely is really important as well. So using Codility as a tool, we were looking around for a solution to help with this as an issue and to help, assist with objectivity and time saving for engineers, particularly in high volume roles, university recruiting and entry level positions. There tends to be a really high number of applicants. So it becomes a time versus number thing to really help streamline that and get to the good candidates quickly, I guess. So we were looking around for a tool, and in fact, in Sydney, our engineering teams came to us with Codility and said, this is a tool that we think might be interesting to use. And so we got them to play with it and break it and have a trial with it, and felt that there were a really good numbers of tests to be able to that were relevant to Dolby, and also the fact that we could bespoke some of those tests as well made it very relevant to us. And I think as well as a time saver, I think one of the things that has been useful is that it helps us uncover some talent that maybe might not get as good of a look in under normal circumstances if you're just assessing resumes. Sometimes there are people that may not have the best resumes on paper, but actually can write really good code. So it's a great way to actually potentially unearth some talent that you may under circumstances overlook. And again, also help with minimizing unconscious bias there as well. One of the things that we've really liked is that there's the possibility to, when reviewing results, it's not just giving you a score, there's also a playback option, so you can actually look at how the candidates have actually approached it, and you can actually look and see their thought process, see how they've gone about actually tackling the problem. And I think that can be very useful, sometimes as useful as getting the 100% correct result, seeing how they do it, and sometimes you can identify somebody who has got a really good approach, but maybe didn't get 100% on the test because of a simple syntax error or something. And I think that's very useful. It also gives engineers something to talk about in subsequent interviews and ask them why they approached solving the problem in the way that they did. So certainly that's been quite useful. I think one of the other things that we've found is that it gives candidates the opportunity to do a coding exercise in a way that's probably most optimally comfortable for them as well. So sitting in front of a computer rather than having to do it in a group interview environment where you've got a bunch of engineers sitting in a room looking at you coding or potentially writing code on a whiteboard as well, that not everybody thrives in that environment. So having something that's a little bit more natural is whether it's the structured coding test that you send them or you do it in an interview situation at a laptop. I think that's certainly helped to give candidates the opportunity to put the best foot forward for interview processes. So yeah, in terms of where we now used Codility, we started off in, so Sydney was the guinea pig for Codility for Dolby. So we took it on an initial trial, told the engineers to go and play with it and try and break it. Found some tests that we felt were useful and relevant to Dolby, and then from that also created our own tests, and the bespoke test creation function was very useful to us for certain roles where we wanted to add some extra questions that would focus on things that were more relevant to domain areas like audio, for instance, as well. And so that functionality to be able to add your own tests in there was very useful. And so beyond the trial, we took it on board. The Sydney engineers really use it quite heavily, and we probably use it for, I'd say, over 90% of our roles and almost all of our technical positions. And I think it's been a real success. And from that, we've rolled it out over the company in stages. So the US is now using it quite significantly. We've just rolled it out into APAC, and our China recruiting team is starting to roll that out and train the managers on that as well. And that's been, the feedback from the engineering and hiring teams has been really positive there as well. And I think one of the other good points around this is that it's we've been able to curate tasks that are relevant to the roles, and that's really helped to be a signal to the candidates that it's something that's relevant. That's feedback we've gotten from candidates as well, that sometimes when they go and do coding exercises, they end up doing tasks that aren't really relevant to what the role is actually going to be. So I think that's something to certainly be mindful of when you're going to create these tests as well, and making sure you've got stuff that resonates with the candidates, and as well as being able to robustly test them. So in terms of things that we're still working on, there's certainly some changes that are continuing to happen as Dolby continues to grow. I think working with the hiring teams to determine the optimal testing environment is something that I'd really recommend if people want to use tools like this as well. I've had hiring managers come to me and suggest a 12-hour limit for a test, and think that's going to be a great thing because candidates can go and do a piece of code and move away from it and come back to it, and thought that would be a really good experience for the candidate. But obviously we had to educate the hiring manager a little bit to say that may not be a great candidate experience, and if they see a 12-hour test, that people might freak out a little bit as well. So there's some education there as well, and I think that's a really important part of onboarding a tool, is to get buy-in from the hiring managers, really show them how it's going to help the hiring process, and streamline it for them and add value. And I think if you can do that and be mindful of the candidate experience at the same time as well, I think that's the best environment to get a good result as well. I think in terms of Dolby more broadly, we're certainly moving into some really exciting new areas and embracing tools like machine learning and data science to help us get there as well. I mentioned cloud computing is something that's a really big focus for Dolby at the moment. We just launched our new API platform, Dolby.io, last Thursday. So that's really exciting that engineers are going to be able to use Dolby API libraries to actually go and create compelling experiences, possibly in a way we haven't even thought of ourselves as well. So being able to harness the creativity of the developer community is something that's really exciting and opens us up to a whole different type of customer, I guess, as well. So that's something that the recruiters and the recruiting team is going to have to continue to stay on top of and make sure that we understand how to recruit in those spaces as well. I think the employer branding and candidate experience part is really vital when you're going to approach the market. It's a very competitive marketplace out there as well, so having a really good story to be able to tell prospective candidates as to why Dolby is a great place to work, or why your company is a good place to work, is something that's certainly vital. And also having a really good experience as a candidate is a great way to ensure that you've got strong employer branding as well. Where people will go back and say, it was a great process, and where people feel that they know where they stand at every stage of the recruitment process. I think that's very vital, and so getting feedback back to candidates, ensuring that they know where they stand. These are all good signals back to the marketplace as to what that company is going to be like to work for ultimately. Workplace flexibility is something that's certainly a big topic at Dolby. It's something we were already thinking about pre COVID-19, and we were looking at a really increasing workplace flexibility and how that was going to work. And that can be complex sometimes in an engineering environment where people might have equipment that's harder to move around, and labs and things like that as well. So that can be difficult. So how we really put a lot of thought into how to increase that flexibility, because that's something that I think our employees and also prospective candidates are really keen to see more of inside companies. Obviously, COVID-19 and the lockdowns and working from home and working remotely have really been a real litmus test for this. And what's been great is to see that our engineering teams have been really able to embrace that and run with it and be highly effective in those circumstances as well. So it's something I think is only going to continue to grow at Dolby, and I would say in the wider community as well. I think there's probably an opportunity here for us as a society to maybe think a little bit differently about how we go to work and how we live our working lives as well. So that's going to be interesting to see how that pans out in the future. And then a big focus for Dolby is certainly around diversity, and diversity of ideas is really important in an innovation company in particular as well. So we really have a big focus on that as well, and we've done a whole bunch of different things to really try and help and improve that. In Sydney, one of the real focuses has been around improving the numbers in terms of diversity for women engineers, and we've put a lot of thought into this, and in fact we've actually gone back to the high school level and engaged with STEM there, and done a whole bunch of work with National Computer Science School, Girls Coding Network. There's a whole bunch of things that we've done there, because that's where we've realized that that's where decisions are being made by students about what career path they're going to take. So that's where we really need to encourage students to pursue STEM subjects as well. So yeah, that's been a really interesting journey, and something that we're really focused on going forwards as well. And yeah, so I think that's a little bit of a flavor for where we're at. In terms of successes, I can certainly point to the university recruiting and entry-level recruiting as being particular successes. I mean, I think overall we've certainly seen Codility being a really useful tool for technical recruiting, but particularly where volumes are high and we've got a whole bunch of candidates to really get through as well. Having an objective metric that you can measure against, particularly where in university recruiting, for instance, you don't have a lot beyond what university they're at, what subject they're doing, and their GPA, I guess, as well. So there's not a whole bunch of information there. So being able to actually highlight the types of people who've got the right type of skills is a great filtering tool for us as well. So that's been certainly very useful. And I think in terms of uncovering candidates that we may have overlooked, I think that's been another real success for us as well. There've been a number of times where there've been candidates that may have slipped through the cracks or even were borderline on paper, but they've come and done a Codility test and really excelled at that, and that's really helped propel them forward in the recruitment process. And we've made some really interesting hires out of that as well, and it's helped to certainly minimize some biases that are there as well in the hiring process as well. It's a great objective metric. So yeah, overall, I'd certainly feel it's been a real success for Dolby, and something that I feel has added to the recruiting process for Dolby, and something that I think we can be very proud of, I think. So that's the main body of my presentation. I'll just hand it back to you, Vivian, so we can talk about some questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And it looks like we have received a few different questions in the chat. So Steve, I'm going to read them out to you, and you can kind of give some insight. Again, I'll jump in case there's anything else that I can provide from my 4 years working in this area. And just as a reminder for everybody listening, there is a questions area of the chat. So please feel free to go ahead and add in any questions that you have. And I'm going to go ahead and turn on my webcam so that everyone can see me as I'm asking Steve these questions and jumping in with any answers.
Oh, I'll do that too. Hang on.
Steve, are you ready? Perfect. So the first question we have, Steve, what are the 3 main features that you think attracts applicants to work for Dolby, and what attracted you personally?
Oh, good question. I think in terms of why applicants want to work for Dolby, I think we work in an interesting domain area, entertainment technologies, movies, TV, music, that side of things. I think that's, as I mentioned in my presentation, people are genuinely interested in that, and it's nice to be able to combine your personal interests with what you're actually working on. I think the work itself is challenging. We're a market leader in a lot of what we do, so I think that there's a lot of job satisfaction from working in an innovation environment that really pushes the boundaries of what's possible. And I think it's product based as well, and engineers actually get to see the fruits of their labors used by millions of people around the world every day, and that's something I really hear from the engineers, that gives them a real sense of job satisfaction. For me personally, you may or may not notice behind me, I am a movie fan. I love movies, and for me, working for Dolby is that perfect mix of, I love technology, I love working with people and connecting talent with opportunity, and I love movies. So I think that's been my dream job in a lot of ways. I think beyond that, I love the people who work here. People are very obviously smart and talented engineers, but genuinely passionate about what they do, and that's infectious, I think, as well, and it makes for a really good working environment. And I think also low on ego, which doesn't always go hand in hand with talented as well, but it's just a really nice place to work. That people are a real reason to go to work every day.
And I think that enthusiasm that you mentioned is clear when you talk about what you love about Dolby and working there, and how much you love movies. So I have to ask, since you have about a zillion of them behind you, what's your favorite movie that you've got back there?
No, don't ask me that. It's like asking me what my favorite child is. So I don't think I could choose just one. So Somebody asked me what my favorite horror movie was recently, and I said the most recent one I saw was Midsummer, and I really enjoyed that. So that's probably the best answer I can give at the moment.
That's a great answer. Great answer. And also, I obviously can't speak for the offices in Australia for Dolby, but I personally live across the street from the San Francisco Dolby office. And I can definitely tell you just from having walked by there probably about once or twice a day for the past 6 years, that it is a really cool looking office. So I have to imagine there's a pretty cool work environment there.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic. It's very creative. There's a whole bunch of laboratory. I think we've got over 100 labs in the San Francisco office as well. So it's a very creative and collaborative environment. We've got I think 280 seater cinema in our headquarters as well. So and it's like the most amazing cinema utilizing Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos technologies as well to really deliver a fantastic Dolby cinema experience.
Yeah, I've heard about that. And living
Mm.
across the street with you guys for so long, I've been trying to get into that theater. So we'll see if maybe one day I can share a little bit of insight on that too.
Absolutely. Nobody's going to any theaters at the moment, unfortunately, with the COVID-19. I have to admit, I am suffering from movie theater withdrawal pangs at the moment. So hoping that we'll be able to go to the theaters before too long.
Hopefully, and I hope that's the first one I go to. So we have another question here. Someone was asking about what were the most important criteria that you were looking for when you were searching for a technical assessment platform, and what was the reason that you ended up deciding to partner with Codility?
I would say our criteria were probably, I would say first and foremost, relevancy. So making sure that the types of questions that we could test candidates on were relevant to the types of roles that we were hiring for. Also that there were the range of languages that we use at Dolby, that there were enough tests there that we could effectively test across a whole very broad range of languages that we use at Dolby. One of the things, and I think I mentioned this earlier, is the ability to bespoke and create our own tests. I think that was something that was very important to us as well, because we've got some specialized areas that we wanted to be able to test in. Beyond that, I would say ease of use is something that was important, and that's for both the hiring team and for candidates, that it was straightforward to use there as well. And then reliability and objectivity as well. So, we wanted to make sure we had a platform that was reliable and scalable, something that had functions like you could minimize cheating on it by checking the code that they use against uh, online searches and things like that as well. So that's a good way to help ensure that the right person is taking the test and is doing it themselves, I guess, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's always been really a cornerstone that I've seen with Codility from the 4 years that I've been here, as one of the things that we consider to be most important. Because of course, part of the big purpose of using an automated testing platform is really to help you guys make the best decisions of who to move forward. We want to make sure that you guys are definitely not moving forward anyone that lacks the integrity to create their own work, and then also probably, let's face it, don't have the skills that they have to rely on something they've found online. One of the things that you mentioned there, though, was that you were really looking to be able to test in some of the languages that you guys currently use at Dolby. Are you able to share what some of those technologies are, or is that proprietary information?
In terms of languages, it's very broad. So ranging from very low level languages, we use C quite extensively. We use MATLAB in terms of algorithmic development. We use C++ quite in a number of different teams. Python is something that almost every engineer at Dolby uses in some way, shape, or form. So that's an important language for us as well. Mobile app development, so working at Swift and Go and things like that are certainly languages that we use. JavaScript and Node.js for cloud technology is something that we're increasingly starting to use as well. So there's a real range there, and Codility covers the vast majority of those. The only one it doesn't use is MATLAB on that side, but everything else there are fantastic tests that we use all the time.
That's great. Thank you. And something that I've noticed in the market as well that I'm curious to see if this is something Dolby has experienced. Are you guys moving into some of the newer technologies like using more big data and cloud, things like Kubernetes, AWS? Have you guys been moving in that direction as well?
Oh, very much so, very much so. So I think I mentioned a little bit earlier on that cloud is a really big part of Dolby going forward. So and making our technology available in the cloud as APIs and opening that up to the developer community to be able to take our technology and use it in some really interesting ways. So cloud is very big for us. So AWS, even some GCP. Node we use quite a lot. Kubernetes definitely we're certainly using a lot more of as well. So it's interesting that as a company we've traditionally worked at a lower level, and look, we certainly still do in some areas as well. So embedded technology and stuff that physically goes and sits on a chip in a device on that side. So that's we're still obviously going to do that, but looking at it different ways to use our technology and for people to access our technology, we're definitely moving in that direction. AI and machine learning is another area that we're starting to do a whole bunch more in as well. So looking at speech recognition and detection and things like that. So machine learning is a very key part of all of that, and analysis tools and all of that is certainly something that is we're looking at a lot. So data science is definitely something that we're starting to do a lot more with.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys are seeing a lot of rapid change as the market, which always changes very rapidly as well. And it sounds like you guys are really following a lot of that with your hiring.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's been an interesting challenge on the recruiting side of things as well to make sure that we understand how to recruit the best talent in those spaces as well, and what's important for hiring in different spaces is different ultimately.
Yeah, and that actually leads into another question that I see here. What trends tend to impact tech hiring the most, as far as you've seen?
In what sense?
That's, I think, the extent of what was sent over to us, but I don't know if you want to maybe look over, for example, the last 12 months and think of any ways that you guys have shifted the way that you're either interviewing or the types of roles that you're looking for. What trends that you've maybe seen in the market, or as we've shifted from a more candidate market into a more hiring market, how things have maybe changed, what you might have seen that's influenced those things.
Sure. Well, in terms of tech trends, I think some of the areas I've spoken around cloud technologies, data science, machine learning, IoT are all certainly very hot trends in the marketplace at the moment. And Dolby's certainly recruiting in all of those spaces. Obviously, COVID-19 has had a real big impact on a whole bunch of different areas in the economy, and it certainly has changed the way that we've had to approach recruiting, moving to a 100% virtual interviewing model. We were lucky in that we were well set up for that because we already had done quite a bit of remote hiring, so where we were hiring talent from around the world. It's certainly in Australia we've hired engineers from across the globe as well. So we've had a lot of experience in having to do 100% remote interviewing as well. But that's moved from only a few interviews out of the majority of interviews into 100% virtual model as well. So that's been a shift, and we've had to be very agile and think around that and think about how we are still able to assess candidates effectively. How do we recreate virtually what we've done in person? So a session at the whiteboard, how do you recreate that virtually, and looking at virtual whiteboarding tools and things like that as well. And live coding exercises are a really big important part of the process, as well as having structured tests that you send candidates as a separate part of the process.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest things that I've been hearing from the customers and the companies that I personally work with is
Mm.
that huge question of how do we create the same experience and the same positive experience and level of engagement that we had when we brought people into face-to-face interviews while doing that entirely remotely. So I'm myself, I would love to hear, and I'm sure a lot of the other people listening would love to hear how you guys have handled that, and how close you've been able to kind of replicate what you were doing in person and that level of engagement.
Sure. I think we've been able to come up with something that replicates it as well as we can. I mean, obviously there's some things that you can never fully replicate, you know, having somebody in the same room and that as well, but having a really good first of all conferencing experience and making sure that that works optimally is very important. So Dolby actually has a product, communications product called Dolby Voice, where we've really improved the experience of being on a conference call and having that audio work as optimally as it can, and that's takes away some of the pain points of having to be on conference calls. So you know, using a tool like that has been really useful. So having the right tools there at your fingertips really can help minimize some of the issues you face with moving from in person to virtual, I guess. Some things we were able to replicate. I mean, as I mentioned before, our main three-stage process of phone interview, uh, coding exercise, and then they remain the same. So it's really about that sort of replicating the on-site interview experience, and it's allowed us to maybe be a little bit more creative about how we do it. So there's certainly been some advantages with it. Um, Splitting out the interviewers and creating mini breakouts has become a little bit easier that way as well. So we don't have to do an interview all potentially in one go. We might be able to do it over a couple of days. So giving that flexibility to candidates as well, meaning that they have to take, if they're in a job, they have to take less time off work in one go. I guess that's been an interesting addition to it as well. Beyond that, I think, as I said, trying to recreate that uh, interactive experience that we go for in a Dolby final interview, where you're engaging with Dolby engineers, you're bouncing ideas off one another, you're maybe doing some whiteboarding and design, recreating that virtually. I think that's been an important part of the experience. So being able to do that has meant that it's minimized the disruption to our process and has meant that we've still been able to effectively interview candidates and give them a good experience at the same time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I know it's interesting just from my work with Dolby. I know that especially, again, I won't speak for the office in Australia, but especially some of the different offices out in Asia, who of course, you know, have locked down before much of the rest of the world and have had a little bit more time to adjust to this new normal, have really been incorporating Codelive much more significantly into their
Yep.
process. Which for anyone that doesn't know is Codility's pair programming functionality, which is allowing them to do almost like whiteboarding, except directly on a real IDE. And that's kind of replaced some of that, because I heard you mention that one of the biggest things is replicating that whiteboarding experience.
Yes, absolutely, and that's yeah, we've started to use that a lot more. I think we were using that more sparingly previously, and focusing using Codility more for the set tests that we would send people as well. But certainly having that live coding tool that also allows you to code in real time and also compile in real time as well, which is very useful to be able to see how the code actually works. I think that's been an interesting bow to our string to our bow in our arsenal of recruiting tools.
Excellent, excellent. And that actually leads very nicely into the next question, which is something that I know a lot of people are asking, and that's once things have gone back to a little bit normal and things are opening back up, people are going back to physical work. How do you see the future of hiring changing in that? You know, do you see it going back to what it was before? Do you see there being a lot more remote interviewing and more openness to hiring outside of an immediate location?
I think so. I mean, I think we've been sort of forced into a very interesting social experiment ultimately with the lockdown and COVID-19 being a bit of a litmus test for how we can collaborate effectively remotely. And I think that certainly in Dolby's case, we've seen that we can work very effectively as an organization. So I think it'll be interesting to see what the new normal is when everything's settled down. But I certainly think increased workplace flexibility is going to be a big thing. I think having a robust remote hiring process and interview process is something that's going to become the new norm, or certainly a lot more commonplace as well. So I can see that certainly staying a big part of a recruiting strategy. And the other side of that is around delivering compelling virtual onboarding experience as well, which is the other side of talent acquisition, as well as making sure that because that side of things has changed a lot as well. That you're not having that interaction of coming into office on your first day and meeting your teammates in person and going for lunch and doing all of that. So I think we've had to put a lot of thought into how to deliver that compelling onboarding experience for new hires virtually.
Yeah, and it sounds like that will carry on into the future as well,
so.
And that's going to be, very, very beneficial to learn this now, so that when we do move into that, you guys will already be prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, there's a lot of benefits to the increased workplace flexibility, removing people's commutes if they've got longer commutes, or minimizing that, all these knock-on effects that might be better for the environment even. It really is going to be very interesting to see where what the new normal lands.
Absolutely, and I think it's especially interesting since over the last 5 years or so, there has been a lot of research and study into how effective it is to have a fully or partly remote work environment. And I think that now we're seeing what a lot of those studies were saying actually put into practice, just since, like you mentioned, we were kind of forced into this social experiment. So I think it will be very interesting to see how that continues as it becomes not a necessity, but just something that companies have realized does have a lot of benefits.
Absolutely. And again, I think what we'll probably end up with is a situation where there's going to be a mix. Exactly. And that means that you might have a more flexible workforce. People are going to be able to work remotely, but also physically get together for important things. I mean, for a company like Dolby, for instance, we still do a lot of stuff in labs, and so we're going to still need to collaborate physically for some of that as well. So there is going to be a mix, I think, going forwards.
Absolutely. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. All right, it looks like we have one more question. It's a great question about diversity. Could you please share some practical tips on how to create a more diverse workplace for your engineering team?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think in terms of tips on how to create the workplace, I would say doing some work around minimizing bias and unconscious bias. I know at Dolby we spend a lot of time focusing on that, and doing training in terms of diversity, from the top down, from our ELT right the way through to all the hiring teams as well, and making sure that there's an awareness there, and that there's a lot of training to help minimize that. I think having some objective hiring metrics that you can measure to see where you're at as an organization, and measure your successes as you go along, because if you can't track that effectively, you're not going to know how well you're doing there as an organization as well. So we've, like at Dolby, for instance, we've just recently, as of last September last year, we turned on a whole bunch of analytics tools to help us really have some objective metrics around all of that as well. But I think on a bigger scale, I think creating a workplace that celebrates diversity is really important. There's a lot of things that we can do to really show that companies welcome diversity, and diversity of ideas, and diversity of backgrounds as well. So in Sydney, we've got a a number of groups that fall under our diversity, inclusion, and belonging networks. So we've got a LGBTIQ group called Spectrum. We've got a Women in Engineering. We're looking at things like Indigenous Australians and reconciliation and that side of things. We're celebrating different cultures and big cultural events and really growing that awareness. So I think having that environment that celebrates it is a real signal to everybody inside the organization that diversity is something that's valued, and that your people can have a look at externally and see, okay, this is a great place environment. I am going to be welcomed. I am going to be seen as important in here, no matter what environment I come from and what background I have.
That's beautiful, really beautiful. And that fits in very closely with what you told us earlier about why you love working at Dolby and why you love the people that you work with. Yeah, that was, when I saw that question, that was my initial thought as well. As, you know, there's never going to be a way in interviewing and hiring to eliminate 100% of bias. Of course, it's innate, it's natural. But I think minimizing it and reducing it as far as possible and as early on in the process as possible is really key to making sure that you have a very diverse team. And the two components that you mentioned are, I mean, you really hit the nail on the head as far as what I've seen over the last 4 years. And that's just, you know, number one, having that really objective way to gauge someone's ability, because yes, there are more nuanced things, especially technical hiring, like what's your style of coding or how will you work with a team and communicate. But at the core of it, and really at the beginning, you can code or you can't.
Yes.
I cannot personally, and that is no. If you set the coding test to me. And then the other piece of that as well, of course, is being able to anonymize those results. So that when you're looking at an objective score of this person can or cannot code, you're not seeing any identifying information. So there's no information, not even the candidate's name, not their email address. And I think those two things in conjuncture really help ensure that you're making the best decisions based on someone's hard skills before you start to assess some of the softer skills that are required to make those decisions as well. And that absolutely leads to creating more diverse teams that then, as you guys do at Dolby, can really be celebrated for their diversity.
Absolutely.
Great. All right, that is the end of the questions. Steve, anything else that you want to add or leave us with before we end the webinar?
No, again, I'd just like to echo your last point there around having objective hiring metrics and having tools available to really help that. It really will improve your overall recruiting process, will give you a broader and more relevant pool of candidates. And I think it's certainly for a company like Dolby that, you know, we really need to have a real understanding about people's innate abilities to be able to work in the space that we have. Having a tool like this is certainly very valuable to help us assess that.
Absolutely, and I think it definitely creates a better experience for the hiring managers too. If you know that the initial decisions you're making are based on someone's real, true, hard merit, that means that the candidates you're then talking to are going to be the closest fit. They're having a better time running the interview sessions, and then that is always going to turn around and impact the candidate experience as well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
All right, thank you so much to everyone for joining. If anyone else has any questions that they think about as they're mulling this over the weekend, you're always welcome to look me up on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find, and I'm sure that I can funnel any questions over to Steve if you guys come up with any. Other than that, whether it's 2 days, 3 days, or 4 days, I hope that everyone has a wonderful weekend, and we will see you at the next webinar.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.